Hello, everyone. It is Friday. I hope you're having a good day. We are starting back up, I think, with some attempt at podcasting, live streaming. I am Fred Faulkner. This is Fridays with Fred. Thank you for joining for those of you that are out there. We're going to start this little series up as a way of just kind of doing some knowledge sharing, some talks, some conversation. This is supposed to be interactive. If you happen to be online and you happen to be watching, please feel free to jump in with the comments. And if we're also lucky, maybe we'll bring you back behind the scenes and we'll add you to this actual presentation of this live thing. Definitely trying some things that are new. Again, we're getting into the second half of the year. We're well into the second half of the year. And so we're going to try a few things. All right. So the concept of Friday with Fred could be 10 minutes, could be 30 minutes, could be an hour. We're going to see how the conversations end up taking us. We're going to see where the topics end up taking us. Today, I wanted to start off and kick off this whole series with this idea of why do we need people who quote unquote think different? And if you're familiar with the classic commercial that Apple put out, and specifically a couple different versions of it, but the Think Different commercial, you will know that it takes some of the crazy ones. It takes some of the rebels and the rule breakers to do things that are different. And these are probably the unspoken heroes, because often the people that are or the companies that are sometimes given claim to fame for innovation, they're always not the first one to do some of that innovation as well. So I want to talk through some of the reasons on why I think some of these people, we need them in our lives. We need them in our personal lives. We need them in our work lives. We need them at our companies. And you need to think about how to embrace them and challenge them and evangelize them, because that is how you personally could start to think differently, which brings a whole new perspective to your personal life. But then also, how can it help advance your company at the same time? So let's start off. And I'm passionate about marketing. I'm passionate about tech. That's kind of where my according to Fed personal brand kind of lives, that intersectionality there. But let's talk about some of the technology innovations that have happened over the number of years and how they've changed our lives. How do we do things differently today because of these people? So I'm going to start with some of the easy ones that we might think of day to day. We'll just start with what do you guys use as your search engine on a day-to-day basis? I'm going to guess most of you probably use Google. And Google was started by, Sergey Brin and Larry Page out of University of Southern California, Stanford, USC, Silicon Valley. But it's changed. They changed the way we look at things, the way we use things, the way we use technology on a day-to-day basis. It's not just about Google as a search engine, but when they started off, they wanted to create something that organized the world's information. If you think about Google, you might think of them as just Google Maps. You might think of them as Android. They purchased Android. They didn't start Android for sure. You might think of them as a lot of their technology they didn't actually own and create, besides the search engine. I think that's really the only thing that they've originated. After that, Maps was an acquisition. Android was an acquisition. A lot of the other kind of technology they've rolled out in the world has been acquisitions, but how they've taken the idea of what Google is, and now Alphabet, and brought it to the way we interact with content, the way we think about how we promote our businesses. Started as a search engine, moved into an advertising engine. That is where they make the most of their money. But they said, we want to think about search differently, how we organize information differently. So hence, Google is a name, as a household name. I'm going to Google that. It's an adjective. It's not even just a search engine. It's an adjective. So that's one. Second, let's think about how you shop. Who changed the way we think about shopping forever? That'd be Jeff Bezos, right? He wanted to start an online bookstore. And that now has become the de facto standard of what Amazon has become the de facto standard of how a lot of companies want their search experience to be, right? One-click buying, easy ordering process, the reviews, the whole listings, how things are organized. That has become like, I want my search, I want my commerce to be like Google. So Jeff Bezos has fundamentally changed not just how we shop, because also next day delivery, 2-day delivery, the whole concept of Prime, it has fundamentally changed how we shop day to day, right? I can go to the store or I can get it online and it gets delivered from me. And the everyone's standard has become the Amazon standard, not just my normal shopping standard. It is the Amazon standard that is out there. So again, change the fundamental way we use and we think about shopping was Jeff Bezos. Was he the first person to do e-commerce? No, but he did something innovative enough that made it different for us. Okay, another example. I'm going to use this one, Mark Zuckerberg. Now, fun fact, Mark Zuckerberg may have changed the way we think about social media, but back in 1990, but Facebook was not the first real social media company. There's a ton of companies that came before them, right? But if you want to go all the way back in the Wayback Machine, it is 2022 when we're recording this. But back in 1996, May of 1996, I was a senior in high school getting ready to graduate when this company called 6 Degrees was launched. And it had a profile, a friends list, school affiliations, and it was started by the guy by the name of Andrew Weinreich. 6 Degrees. That was the first, quote unquote, what is deemed the first, quote unquote, social media website. I never knew about it. I think probably the first social media interaction I ever started dealing with was probably AOL chat, more than anything else. There was Friendster, there was, MySpace. Those all came before Facebook. But Facebook fundamentally changed how we think about social media. And therefore has fundamentally changed how we think about interacting with and staying connected with friends. And their whole mission is to connect the world. And now with their idea of, they didn't create AR and VR or augmented reality or virtual reality. They've purchased that through the Oculus platform and others. But now Mark is thinking about how he wants to fundamentally change how we do and connect with people moving forward with the metaverse and using VR and AR glasses to kind of do that. Again, not the only one. Apple's thinking about that. Google's thinking about that. Google was setting out the AR augmented reality world before anybody else, because they put out Google Glass, an innovative technology that didn't really go anywhere because it was before its time. And that's something I think is important to kind of keep in mind. What is before our time that is now mainstream? So, and the last thing I'll say is probably an example is probably is Elon Musk, right? We think about, what has Elon Musk done that has fundamentally changed the way we think about things? And was it that he was part of eBay? No. Was it part of his solar company? No. It was about electric cars. And how do we bring electric cars to the table? Well, Elon Musk didn't create the electric engine. In fact, what's his company called? Tesla. And why was it picked as Tesla? Because Nikola Tesla back in the 1900s, 1800s, created that first electric engine. And due to a lot of things like politics and other things, electric cars could have been a thing a very long time ago, but it wasn't, because they had a lot of other things that factors came into play. But Tesla as a car brand was because of Nikola Tesla as an engineer, as a visionary. And believe me, Nikola Tesla was thought of as one of the crazy ones, one of the wild ones, one of the square pegs in a round hole. He fits all those types of elements, all those attributes, because of who he was, and he went against the grain. So a couple of examples of those who have thought about the world differently. Elon's also changing the way we think about space travel, the way we think about, colonization. Wants to colonize Mars. He wants to think about things differently. And there's one thing that I think that each one of these people have that are in common, which we'll talk about in a second, but that is they also were the crazy ones, the ones that kind of stayed the course and stayed the path, but they also have access to resources. And that's an interesting thing to think about when you think about how you can change life differently, why you need some of those things to think different. Not because, Elon wanted to say, hey, gas engines are not going to work out in the world, just, because of fossil fuels and unsustainable energy, but he wanted to do something different. He went against that grain. So, again, thinking differently, stating the course, those are the kind of the concepts here. So Zuckerberg, Musk, Bezos, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, those are just a few of the tech examples. We can go on and on about examples that are out there. But what does it mean to have those crazy people, the ones that think different kind of in our lives, whether it be personally or in the workplace? And I'll say within personal perspective, having people that go against the grain, go against your own maybe thoughts that challenge you, I think it's just good to have different perspectives. Doesn't mean that to necessarily change your mind, but you want to have some of that different perspective in your life instead of staying maybe in your own bubble. You want people that are going to challenge you a little bit. They're going to make you think about things differently. And that's healthy. That's healthy from a perspective of learning. That's healthy from a perspective of knowledge sharing. I think that's healthy from a perspective of just emotional intelligence and empathy that goes with it too. All things that you need. If you stay in your own little bubble, in your own little world, you kind of miss on all that stuff. You don't grow as a human. You don't grow as a person because of that. But when you bring that type of thinking different in the workplace, it becomes a very different scenario. Maybe not different in the sense of Well, all those things, Fred, you just said, challenging and emotional intelligence and changing perspective and thinking about things. Yes, those are all the things that I would expect to see coming into the workplace, but it does give you a sense of opportunity at the same time. So let's think about something for a second. And especially, I think that's a little more current in today. So today we're now in a remote world because of COVID. Remote work was not something that got invented by COVID. It wasn't, became a necessity because of COVID, but there are a lot of companies that were remote first company first. 37 Signal slash Basecamp. They've been one for forever. WordPress, who runs, 30% of the world's websites are run on WordPress, but Matt Mulligan, he started WordPress as a remote first company. And company's been successful because of the way they've come at this from a perspective right out of the gate. COVID made the rest of the world become remote, but it made us think differently. How can you still manage people remote? How can you still get your work done remote? Is it possible to do this all in a remote world? That is okay, from the sense of, yes, COVID forces to do this, but it was very much anytime someone brought up like, hey, can I work remote? It took a lot of energy to think about how can I make this work for me? Is this a culture that I can accept? Is this a perspective of accountability that I can accept? We've had to now because of it, but now on the flip side, we're getting back to this return to office scenario and how are we going to bring everyone back into the world? And why are we thinking different there? Like there's a lot of, nuances and challenges around why we're going to end up moving back into return to office space. Some companies will, some companies won't, but it is a thinking differently. How can our companies going to remain to think different? How they can be successful differently than having to be, now we're going to go back to the office. Well, what does that mean for you? What does it mean for your employees? Here's the one thing that I want, an example of something that I wanted to kind of bring up. And this is where I think it's going to get really interesting from this whole thinking different perspective. Remember when, and some of you will, remember when you just worked a 9 to 5 and you might be in a professional services, might be an agency perspective, might be something else, but you're working a regular 9 to 5 and then you found out you lost a deal because someone put in the extra hours that actually then got the work done faster, that then delivered to the client better, that then won them the business. That's because someone decided to think differently. They wanted to think that I can just stop at 5 o'clock, or I can move forward and do things and get it to the client faster, maybe a little cleaner, maybe more reviewed. And therefore the client's going to pick me versus somebody else. They wanted to think differently. Thinking differently is, I think is uncomfortable. It's something that could also be a differentiator. That's, I think, an important thing to think about. Differentiation. Thinking differently allows you to be innovative. Thinking differently allows you to challenge the status quo. Thinking differently allows you to maybe find a new revenue stream, a new product or service, a new aspect of client service that wasn't there before. And you can't necessarily force innovation. You can't necessarily force that type of thinking. But when you embrace the idea that all ideas can be a good idea, when you think about, I have someone that's willing to shake a tree and say, well, just because we've done it this way for years, decades, doesn't mean doing it somewhere else isn't going to be beneficial, isn't going to help us, isn't going to differentiate us out in the world. And I think sometimes that's an uncomfortable place to be because it threatens status. It threatens maybe internal politics. It threatens the idea that there are other ways of doing things, and that, change is uncomfortable at the same time. But thinking different is important. I think for me, and I think for a lot of other organizations, when you're willing to allow thoughts and ideas and innovations to creep up, that is when you're going to start to see fundamental change. Jeff Bezos wanted to do bookstores differently. Mark Zuckerberg wanted to find a way to connect the world. Google wanted to find a way to organize the world's information. These are companies and people that thought differently than what was the status quo. I mean, think about even the most fundamental things, which is like, how do you slice bread? For a long time, you had a loaf of bread and you just used one knife. Well, someone came up with the idea of how to slice bread into slices in a very fast way, right? And in a very manufactured fast way. And that became a new way of thinking. It takes every loaf of bread in the bread aisle is sliced for the most part, right? Unless you make it yourself. So that is an innovation because someone thought differently. So it doesn't just happen to happen in tech, it happens in all industries and all areas of life. Thinking differently is important to allowing innovation to happen, allowing competitive advantage to happen, allowing for maybe better work life balance, maybe more employee satisfaction, maybe whole new industries can be created because someone decided to think differently. So I encourage everyone to think about how you can allow different thinking to creep into your organization. How are you allowing that type of conversation to happen where it doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to be a threat to the status quo? It's going to be embraced that the status quo does not always have to be the right thing or the only way of doing things. Are you willing to experiment? Are you willing to fast fail? Are you willing to um, encourage that this level of transparency of ideas is acceptable at your organization? Those are things that I think are going to set organizations apart. They're going to be the next Googles, the next Facebooks, the next Teslas, the next SpaceXs of the world. It's going to be the one that says, "This is not how I have to do things today, because there's a better way of doing it, and I can take that idea from anywhere inside my organization." Um, Now, the flip side is that there are always going to be the resistance, right? Is change management is never easy inside an organization, even when it's just throwing ideas out at the wall. And thinking different does not always mean take every idea and decide to run with it. Because sometimes thinking different could also be a distraction. You do have to stay your course. You do have to find the things that are going to keep you whole, the things that are going to continue to bring in revenue and keep the lights on at the end of the day. But so you have to find that balance of how much of thinking different are you going to bring in, or how much of thinking different are you just going to embrace? Important factors to think about. But I do encourage everyone, think different, allow thinking different to bring into the organization. And I'm going to leave you, because this is going to be a quick Friday with Fred today. But I'm going to leave you with this, and that is what was the quintessential commercial that Steve had. So think about this. Listen to this. This was recorded in 1997. Steve Jobs and his Think Different commercial.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So who's the crazy ones? Who are the ones that are going to change your world? Who are the ones that are going to change your life personally? And who are the ones that are going to take this chance and change the world in a new way? Be one of the crazy ones. Think about things differently. Embrace those who are willing to shake a tree, the ones that are attempting to be a square peg in a round hole, the ones that are going to be maybe not as fond of the rules. They're not always the ones that are going to be disruptive. They're the ones that are going to at least challenge the status quo. That's healthy aspects of an organization. That's healthy aspects of what you should be bringing to the table. And who knows, maybe that crazy idea is going to be the new business model that's going to set you apart from everybody else. I'm Fred Faulkner. This is Friday with Fred. Thanks for joining me today. We will see you on a future one. Have a great one.